I'm unmuting myself and am excited and a little nervous. This is the first time I've done a more extended, any type of extended presentation in Coda. So please bear with me. And this is my plan for today. So I am talking about the first three promises as connected to promise 11. So truth in advertising here. I've been doing my recovery program in Coda for about 2 years, and I'm in the middle of the fourth step. So when they asked me to speak, I thought, well, I'm not even through with the whole 12 steps yet, right? What can I do? But then Rona suggested, well, presumably I've worked the first three, right? At least on an initial basis. And her idea was to kind of see how those connect to our promises, particularly promise 11. So this is my plan for today. I want to do it in three segments, three kind of half-hour segments. So the first segment, we're really going to be focusing on that sense of the step one, we admitted we were powerless over others. So I want to really talk about what my experience with that has been. And then then we'll take a break. And then in our second segment, we'll talk about what it means to surrender to our true higher power, which we see in steps 2 and 3. And then in the third part, we'll look at how this all ties into promise 11. So I will get into promise 11 in our last section. And my hope is I'll talk a bit and share some of my experience, strength, and hope in each section, and then we'll stop and we'll have, a time for discussion. So we can process as we go along rather than having all the sharing at the end. So let's see how it goes. Here we go, everyone. So I am Shelly, and I have been, as I said, working in the program for a couple of years. Many years ago, I went to a CODA meeting or two and thought it all sounded good, and then did nothing. Came home, never went to another meeting again, read a few books, but didn't really work the program. So it's really only in the last couple of years that I've gotten serious and said, let me come to meetings, let me find a sponsor, finally, let me work the steps. So this first step, which to me is so big and has been difficult, is we admitted we were powerless over others. So kind of what I want to share with this is this kind of sense for myself of feeling powerless throughout my life, but trying to cover it up with a false sense of power. Essentially building for myself, of course, not really knowing I was doing it at the time, but building for myself a false persona, a false image, a false self that I thought I needed to do. And so I had a false sense of power with an underlying sense of powerlessness. And I was always trying to combat that sense of feeling powerless through trying to create a sense of power. And so how that happened, it was in several ways. So I tried to gain power by being a higher power to other people. And I don't know if anyone here can relate to that, but that was a prime strategy, right? Make myself indispensable in some way, and I will somehow feel powerful. So that meant that at work, I took on a bunch of projects that I might not have even had time to do, but I felt like I had to because people were looking to me to make a difference, right? Well, what was happening? I was putting myself into positions so that people would have to look to me, right? I was over volunteering. I was signing up for everything. I was creating programs, maybe even that were not necessary, right? So that I could have this sense of power. I got a false sense of power also by finding people that I felt needed a lot of advice, and really trying to help them with my good ideas and advice, right? Um, you know, uh, I did it with my partner. I did it with friends. I did it with my mother, and my mother did it to me. We did it to each other, right? I was trying to be her higher power and tell her what she should do. She was trying to be my higher power and tell me what I should do. And it didn't really work very well. So, also part of that false sense of trying to be a higher power was I just would do a lot of reading books, trying to know everything I could possibly know so that I wouldn't make a mistake and so that I would maintain this sense of, I'm this higher power, right? I actually remember in graduate school, I had to write a research paper for a class, and almost checked out every book in the library on the topic I was doing. And I tried to read every single thing on this topic so that I would not reveal any ignorance in the area, right? Which kind of drove me crazy. It like literally, I thought I was losing my mind as I tried to check out and read every single book. Now I realize it was a codependency thing of trying to be perfect. So that was one sense of trying to maintain this false sense of I'm the higher power. I also, interestingly, tried to gain power by making somebody else my higher power. Now, that seems contradictory, right? Like, how am I trying to gain a sense of power by making other people my higher power? Well, what I ended up doing was sort of adopting this kind of fake powerlessness. I'm a victim. I'm helpless. I'm needy. Somebody come along and save me, right? And yet, when somebody would try to come along and I would put that person in the higher power position, then eventually, guess what happened? They disappointed me, right? They didn't act like I thought they should as the higher power. Um, and so I would end up manipulating them to try to keep them as my higher power. They shouldn't get off their pedestal. They shouldn't have any flaws or mistakes because they're my higher power. I need them to be perfect, right? For me, not for them really, but for me, so that I could feel safe that I had somebody that was perfect and would help me and protect me. And of course, nobody could do it. I put my ex-partner in that role for many years, and he resented it. And now I understand why. Because I didn't want him to be him. I wanted him to be somebody else, right? And he just could only be him. He could only do what he could do. And my sort of unreasonable demands and expectations on him were burdensome. Not that he was a perfect person. He obviously had his own issues, but now I see clearly more of my issues. So once again, that making somebody else a higher power really came from me feeling profoundly powerless in myself, right? And just looking, where can I find this sense of safety and security? And then the third way was that I tried to be a higher power, not just to other people, but to myself. And this comes out for me in having a very strong inner critic that was constantly hassling me on what I should be doing, right? So that inner part of myself thought it knew everything I should be doing, and it would constantly be telling me what it thought I should be doing. And then it would criticize me when I didn't live up to all those ideas and plans and expectations. So, and that I realize now that constant nagging, judging, criticizing voice, which I turn on myself, is not the voice of the true higher power. It's something that got created in me when I was younger. So I don't want to, and I want to say with this effort to find this true sense of power that, I was just doing the best I could with what I had. because I grew up in a profoundly codependent and enmeshed family. And everybody was doing these things, right? Everybody was scrambling to try to create a sense of power for themselves. And so, it seemed very natural. For me, my sense of powerlessness came from different things. Um, One thing is I was separated from my birth parents. I was adopted as a child, and I didn't really understand it until recently. But I think that was extremely traumatic for me as an infant, to be separated genetically and biologically from family members, and to never know what the story of that was. And I think that created a sort of trauma, and it created a sense of powerlessness for me. Also, probably a major thing in my life was that I had a very severe illness as a child. And that was a big, big sense of powerlessness. I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis when I was about 5. And it's an inflammatory illness. And at the time in the 60s, doctors really didn't know what to do. There wasn't really good medications. And so, living with any kind of a chronic illness, but especially as a child, when I couldn't really even understand what was going on. And, my parents, who did the best they could, my adoptive parents, they didn't know what to do. Right. So we were all kind of powerless. We felt very powerless over this very severe illness. And that gave me a sense of powerlessness, which has been kind of persistent throughout my life. Very difficult, very painful sense of powerlessness. And as a result of my illness as well, I was separated from my adoptive parents in the hospital for a certain period of time. Back in the day, they didn't always let parents stay with the children when children were in the hospital. So this kind of profound separation from my mother, my father when I was ill, it all, I see now very clearly, it all produced a sense of both powerlessness and lack of trust, right? How can I trust this effed up universe, right? Where these kinds of things happen? Like I can see now, it was like, wow, this is a very scary, unreliable world. I better get to it. I better figure out some way on my own to navigate this. Um, and so, and kind of with higher power too, I think there was a lack of trust in higher power because of these difficult circumstances. And, of course, as a child, why didn't higher power just miraculously do things to change all these situations? And I know for any of us who have had trauma, who came from situations where there was substance abuse, of course, as children, it's like, why doesn't this go away? Why isn't this changed or transformed? So then I think that produces a lack of trust, and as we try to figure out these things. So that's kind of my initial, a sense of this false sense of trying to gain power, and the sense though that as I got older, especially the last few years, I realized that all these ways I was trying to get power were pretty ineffective. Like they didn't really fundamentally work. They were stressful. They had negative consequences, which is exactly what the program tells us, right? That these things produce ineffective ways to live life. And I really experienced that in the last few years when my adoptive mother became very ill. She ended up being diagnosed with vascular dementia. And she had a lot of personality changes. And I was the only living family member in the area to help her during that time. And all my codependency issues were so clear when I was trying to help my mother while trying to preserve some measure of sanity. And we were still so enmeshed, and all the enmeshment issues came up, and trying to make decisions. So it really helped me to see wow, I'm still so codependent because I haven't really um, given things over. And I really was trying to assert power in the situation with my mom with her dementia. And of course, I had to take some responsibility because she got to the point where she couldn't make decisions. But I was trying all on my own to handle this situation, which was really beyond my power. So that kind of woke me up to I needed to do more with the program. So that's that first little segment that I wanted to do and share with you from my perspective. And now we have about, let's see, maybe about 15, 20 minutes, about 15 minutes. And what I wanted to do was open it up for some sharing. And we could maybe have, at this point, maybe 2-minute shares and just having people have the opportunity to share in their own recovery and their work with the steps. How did you come in with either a sense of powerlessness or a sense of kind of trying to create a false sense of power, to build yourself up in some way? Do you have anything to share here on our first step? We admitted we were powerless over others. Or on anything that I shared. And I would, love to hear it. And I'll be keeping time just to make sure we're in time limits. So, and I'll give you a warning. And yeah, feel free to raise your hand and then I'll call on folks. I just so much appreciate what everybody has shared. And just a couple things came to my mind before we took our break. One is that I think for me, a synonym sometimes for that sense of powerlessness is just the word shame. That underneath it, deep down, there is this very pervasive sense of shame. And this false sense of power, I thought you could also use a false sense of worth, a false sense of self-esteem, a false sense of value, a false sense of meaning, right? All of those things. Here we are trying to find worth and self-esteem and value and purpose and meaning, but we just don't quite know, right? Until we get into a recovery program, how we can do that. And, like people are saying, have a lot of compassion because we honestly were doing the best we can, even with the inner critic. A couple of analogies I had for this stage was sort of like I'm in a rowboat, but the boat, instead of pointing downstream, is pointing upstream. And I'm single-handedly trying to row myself up the stream. And man, it's a lot of work, right? Probably most people can agree. It's not easy to be by yourself in that rowboat, trying to row yourself up the stream and then wondering, why is it so damn difficult all the time, right? Until you start to look around and think, I start to look around and think, oh, the boat, right? It's not pointing in the right direction. And then the other analogy I had was kind of the battery, right? I could be a rechargeable. It's like I'm a rechargeable battery, but I don't know I'm a rechargeable battery. I think I'm just a little sort of one-use battery. And so I could be recharging and being plugged into the higher power source, but I don't know that, right? I don't know where the plug is. I don't know where the outlet is. I don't know that I'm rechargeable. But the good thing is in this program, we find that out. We found out we can get recharged. So the good thing is that coming up in our second and third segment, we're really going to look at how do we become empowered? Because I think our program is totally looking at empowerment, as people have been saying, a very real possibility in our lives to find our true source of power, to totally both surrender to it and embody it in our lives so that it really becomes a part of who we are. So with that coming up, we'll go ahead, I think, and if it's fine with everybody, take maybe a 10-minute break so you can attend to whatever you need, a snack or the bathroom, or stand up and move around and shake it out. And then we'll come back at 2 o'clock and we'll start in our second section. Okay, folks, I say let's get going. We can start here on our second section if you're ready to go. And in the second part of this, I thought we could look at the second and third steps. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. and then made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. So I'll share a little bit like I did before on my experience, and then once again, we'll open it up for some shares on it. Yeah, so a complicating factor for me with steps 2 and 3 was from a very young age, I was into spirituality, right? I was into God, I was into church. My parents were not religious. They themselves did not go to church. But when I was younger, if I wanted to go, it was fine. And they sent me to church with my aunt. And it was a fairly conservative Christian denomination that I went to. And I was involved mostly in conservative denominations throughout my youth and early adulthood, really up to about the age of 30. And so when I was looking at this step, right, there initially is confusion because I thought I was really in touch with God, right? I was going to church and I was doing Bible studies and I did youth groups. And when I was in college, I did something called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which was a non-denominational Christian fellowship for college students. That was a big thing for me, right? So what else could I be doing? I'm praying, I'm reading the Bible all the time, I'm going to prayer meetings, right? I am literally, sort of killing myself trying to get in with God good. So then why were there so many weird things happening in my life that were not really nice, right? Like, of course, now I understand there's a lot of codependency. So I think through that whole process, and later I kind of moved away from that form of religion. I got into Buddhism and I did a bunch of meditation, did a bunch of retreats in the Buddhist tradition, various different Buddhist traditions as well. And they have a little bit different concept with higher power. But once again, it was like, in some ways, why isn't this really helping me? And I think now I see that I also had a false image of God. Just like I had a false image of myself, I had a false image of God. And that false image, or higher power, and that false image was sort of made from a lot of different things I learned about God when I was a child and a young adult, that now I don't really think reflect my own higher power, right? It says here that we turn our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Well, my early understanding of God was not from me. It was from adults around me, and it was from church authority figures who told me, this literally is who God is. You need to believe this. And since I was in a fairly dogmatic tradition, there were super big consequences for not believing correctly and for not following through what people were telling you. Like I could go to hell forever and perish in a lake of fire. So that didn't seem good, right? So I'm like, boy, I've really got to walk the straight and narrow here. And the other thing was, it was, well, for example, when I was in junior high at church, in a church youth group, we watched a movie about the rapture and how some good people were going to be raptured and evil people would be left here on this, plague-ridden earth to suffer forever. And it was like, if you don't want to be one of those people, you better follow what we're telling you. And so all of that kind of sense of a little bit of coercion, a little bit of compulsion, and a lot of my feeling with God was fear, literal fear, right? And people talk about living in a fog, fear, obligation, guilt. That was my early training in a lot of these areas. I was in a fog, and I was in a fog of fear and obligation and guilt. And in a lot of ways, that's how my family operated, but that's also how my church structure operated. And so this really, really, really warm, compassionate, loving, kind God was not a big feature of my youth. And so when I got to these steps of surrendering, it's like I really had to start to look at my image of myself and God and who this higher power could be that wouldn't be harassing me, putting me down, motivating me with fear, or holding up perfectionistic, super high standards that could never be achieved by a human being, right? Which I also took on, became very idealistic in my pursuit of God, and then was constantly failing and becoming very depressed because I could not live up to these high standards. So I think for me, a big part of the steps 2 and 3 is realizing I get my own opportunity to understand God in my own way, and in a way that is profoundly helpful to me, nourishing, affirming, valuing, of course, realizing I'm a work in progress and there's always different things that can be looked at and evaluated, but affirming for myself that higher power has made me valuable, that I am already valuable before anything I do. I am valuable in my essence, and I don't have to work to get God's or higher powers esteem, affirmation, validation, or worth. So that's been a step for me. And then, in terms of this idea of the rechargeable battery, seeing myself as a rechargeable battery with higher power there, and I'm plugging into the power that higher power has. And so that's been for me through various things. And I'm just going to throw out some things that I've been doing with steps 2 and 3. And they do include prayer and meditation, but instead of prayer and meditation being very goal driven, I've got to achieve a certain state, I've got to get to a certain level in my prayer and meditation, I'm trying to restructure it as just being more of an open, relaxed listening time. Maybe God, the higher power, speaks in some way and I can hear that. Maybe I have a certain instinct, intuition, or feeling, and if I get quiet enough, I can start to sense that. So that's been part of my process. That also ties into pausing, and before I just immediately react to something, just taking a little pause and trying to listen. Like, do I get any intuition about something? Do I get a feeling about something? And to notice that, because as people said, I didn't know anything about feelings and I didn't pay any attention to them, right? And now I'm realizing, well, higher power does sometimes give me, right, these little feelings that if I stop and pause and investigate a little bit, they're quite helpful. Another thing that's been helpful for me in this surrendering to higher power and the care of the higher power has been getting out of isolation and coming to places like this. Instead of just kind of on my own, just trying to do a spiritual program, just trying to meditate enough in my room by myself, instead coming to classes, to programs, to meetings every week, then I can hear what other people have to say, which is super valuable, not making them a higher power, but just listening how higher power works with them. So that has been super useful. Of course, starting to work the steps. And there's so many other things where I plug in, like if I'm out in nature and I'm really slowing down and then just appreciating a natural situation, I find that I'm turning myself over to the higher power in that moment. I don't have to worry. I don't have to struggle and stress. I can just enjoy my yard, enjoy a tree, enjoy a walk. And that's like very nourishing, right? It's very healing. Also being able to explore my own interests and the things I really enjoy. It was kind of like in the past, if you enjoy it, it's suspicious. Ooh, don't have too much fun. If you're happy, actually you should be working or suffering, right? So now it's kind of like, oh, I can enjoy things. I can be interested in things. that might be a way that higher power is communicating to me through my interests and my enjoyments. And so when I go along with those, I am turning my will and my life over to some aspect of higher power. So yeah, those are all things that have been helpful to me. Those are all things that help me point the boat in the right direction, and that make my life more easy and enjoyable and meaningful. The second analogy I'll throw out is, I think in these two steps, it's kind of realizing, oh, the boat, I mean, I could row it by hand with the oars, but the boat has a motor, right? And I didn't see there was a motor. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's actually a motor, right? That can be like ignited and can send the boat a little bit further than what I can do solo rowing. So I feel like so many things that higher power speaks through is that motor that helps to give the energy and the motivation. And the boat is taking one to places unknown a lot of times, which is kind of frightening, but also kind of exciting. So let's see, how are we on time? We're good. So we have about maybe 15 minutes or so that we could do some sharing. And I would love any sharing on what you found in your program with coming to believe a power greater than yourself could help you and restore you to sanity, and or making a decision to turn your will and lives over to the care of your higher power as you understand higher power. What has that been for you? What have you seen, learned? Anything on that would be great. So we'll open it up again. And once again, a couple of minute shares might be good depending. But go ahead, if you have anything to share, just raise your virtual hand and I can call them, folks. Yeah, I just want to throw in there, that's right. The power to be who you really are, right? And that's okay with my higher power for me to be who I am, right? Even if it's not okay with some other folks. I mean, I totally believe higher power for me is a you go girl, So when you found some of those folks who were like, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. That's awesome. And I also totally resonate with boundaries. Like, hey, I don't have to be sharing personal, private, vulnerable stuff with everybody that may not be safe to share it with. I can decide who to share certain things with, which I think has tremendous wisdom there. And I think it's encouraged by higher power for me. Yeah, so many terrific shares. So here we are. We've got our last 30 minutes. And so feel free to move a little bit if you want to shake, if you want to stretch. It's a long time to sit in front of Zoom, right? As we're living our Zoom lifestyles these days. Okay. And now we're getting to our wonderful Promise 11. Yes, Promise 11, which says, I trust the guidance I receive from my higher power, and I have come to believe in my own capabilities. So I think this is where we've been heading to this whole time, and people have already started to share a little bit about how they are trusting and believing in their own capabilities. So I thought of this as being self-empowered, self with a big S, like maybe the false sense is this kind of small sense of self, right? Very limited, very separate, and empowered with Promise 11. We're empowered in our own capabilities because we know we are in constant connection and energy source with our higher power that is helping to fuel those capabilities. So yeah, so I'll share a couple things from me that relates to this. So, as many codependents, I have always sort of distrusted myself, distrusted my thoughts, my feelings, my beliefs, This has resulted in endless analysis, overthinking, procrastination, delaying making decisions, committing to something and then backing out because I thought, oh, I can't do it, right? Not trusting my capabilities. Or sometimes overestimating what I was going to do, right? Taking on way too much, and of course, setting myself up for failure. So there wasn't really a realistic sense of what I was capable of. And now I'm finding more that middle ground of, what am I capable of? What feels good? What feels authentic? What feels real? What feels true? And I know if those things line up, that, I have the power from higher power to go in those directions. So a couple of things that have happened recently where I've seen this more promise 11, I trust the guidance and believe in and come to believe in my own capabilities. One is recently I retired from my job. I was a public school teacher and I'd been teaching on and off in the profession for about 30 years. And so, you know, more or less some successes, some not successes along the way. Um, I enjoyed certain parts of my job. I enjoyed certain aspects of it, but I really got to a point where I didn't want to do it anymore. And, I had to get out of denial, right? Denying my feelings. This isn't for me anymore. I've sort of been here, done this, and it's good, but now it's time to move on. And I mean, I delayed coming to that. But eventually, I really started to listen to my feelings. And then I started to think about, well, can I do it financially, resource wise? And I started to look at what I could do. And I think that was really trusting the guidance I was receiving, because my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own bodily sensations, everything in me was urging me to stop. And I would have had to do violence to myself to continue, especially when there were options. Now, I could have refused to explore the options and been like, no, I need to keep this job. There's all sorts of reasons why I need to keep doing this job. When really the bottom line was, it would be just too scary for me to think of giving up something that I'd been doing for so many years. And I was very scared, basically, to retire from my job. Even though I had done advanced planning and thought about it and realized that I could basically do it. But I was getting guidance. And, if I chose not to listen to it, I can choose not to listen to that. And I could have just kept on, and I know that higher power gives me that option. But I went ahead and eventually, even though I dragged my feet, I eventually did it. And has it been super easy? No, because a big part of my identity was grounded in that job. And there were some aspects of authentically who I was that came out there, but there were also a lot of that back to the false persona. There was a lot of the false persona also in that job, right? Building myself up. I'm worthwhile because I do this job. So, when I stepped down, it was like, well, what is my worth? Where do I get value? And so that's been a little difficult, but I know exactly that higher power is trying to get me to see that my value doesn't come from a job. It's fine to have a job, or it's fine to do whatever, but that's not my ultimate source of value. So it's been a surrendering to that. And there's blessings in my life from that for sure. And I am believing in my own capability to make that, letting go of that, and then opening up to new things, right, that might transpire. The second thing is a little, well, a little less positive in certain ways. Last January, I fell and broke I had a hairline fracture with my shoulder. That was in second week of January. I just tripped, landed on my shoulder, ended up with a hairline fracture. And, in the past, I would have been like, I am just such a total idiot for doing this, right? First, blame myself for falling, then, like, kind of blame higher power. How could higher power let this happen, right? Um, and also have a lot of resistance to the whole situation. This is wrong. This is terrible. I shouldn't have to go through this. Oh my God. So, I mean, some of those things did occur to me and happen a little bit, but I didn't totally go down the rabbit hole. I kind of like said, I said to myself, I just kind of wonder what can come out of this situation that could be beneficial to me, right? Since I can use the situation in a variety of ways. And I kind of like leaned into higher power to see. And, that situation was funny because when I fractured my shoulder, my arm had to be immobilized and I had to figure out ways to do things that I hadn't figured out before. I had to immobilize my arm for a while and go to physical therapy. And then eventually, my arm was coming back into function. But during that time, I had to figure out, where am I going to find certain things? How am I going to do certain things when I can't use this arm at all? And I actually got pretty creative. And I was pretty impressed with myself, how I managed. I live by myself, so I didn't have someone here to always assist me. I was pretty impressed with myself of how I managed to do certain things. Right now, I have some financial resources, which is helpful, but I didn't drive for 5 to 6 weeks because it wasn't safe. So, sometimes people gave me rides and I had to reach out beyond myself and ask for help. Never super easy for me, right? I'd like to just do it all myself. So I reached out to certain people and asked for help. But other times I took the Uber, right? I usually don't take Ubers, but I took an Uber and it was like a pleasant experience. I met people who were Uber driving. We talked, it was pleasant. I never really had a bad experience. I chatted with folks. That was fine, right? So this thing of, oh my God, it's impossible. Well, not really. And then I found there's like literally a hair salon that's a block away from me that I walked to because I couldn't wash my own hair. I could not raise my hand and my arm up to my head, and the whole thing was painful. So occasionally I just walked down the street to this salon and they very kindly washed my hair for me, right? For a very inexpensive price. And I'm like, I found that out. I made that happen. I took care of that. They're such small things, but the thought that I could trust higher power to guide me along the way and like point out these different opportunities. In the fall, I broke my glasses. Well, who knows? Literally a mile and a half from me, there's an eyeglass repair shop. So I thought, oh, I'm going to have to get all new glasses right now. No, a friend took me down there. They fixed my glasses in an hour and I put them back on my face. So it was things like that that showed me, even in this kind of what was for me a somewhat a difficult situation, there were options and opportunities if I had a open, willing, and accepting attitude to it. Now, if I had just been super, super resistant, then some of those opportunities wouldn't have come forth, right? Because I wouldn't have been open to the direction and guidance. So, and believe me, I did my share of complaining during that whole time, but it was like an opening of my mind process to see how even something that was difficult could work out okay. And I could learn a lot through it in the sense of trusting higher power to guide me and also to believe in my own capabilities to get what I needed, to ask for help, to find the resources that I needed at that time, which I was able to do. in combination with higher power. So that's just a couple of examples from me in my own life. So I'd love, just as we close our session for some sharing, if anybody has any ideas, experiences, things they'd like to share about Promise 11. I trust the guidance I receive from higher power. I come to believe in my own capabilities. Anything you'd like to share on that? Would love to hear whatever you have to say. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right, with the capabilities aspect of it, that when we're really, really, truly loving and enjoying things, it seems like it's easier to grow our own capacity for something when we really feel deeply and enjoy it. Um, and that is a helpful direction to go in. Yeah. So awesome meeting. I feel like appreciated everyone's presence and appreciated everyone's shares. And yeah, I didn't bring this up much, but in 2018, my partner and I separated. We had been together over 20 years, and I moved out from his house and bought my own house. And my capabilities have been expanding ever since. Things I never thought I could handle on my own, I am now handling on my own, or I am finding resources that help me, right? And I realize with my capabilities, part of my capabilities is tying into higher power to identify useful resources, which are not codependent, but which have an equality to them, because I do need resources in my life, but also there's things I've just been able to do on my own. So that's been a big, awesome journey, and definitely has been part of Promise 11 for me. So, all right, it's sad. We have to stop. We all have to go back and go to our own lives, but we'll see each other at meetings sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. We have awesome CODA meetings in Arizona. Bunch of them are on Zoom. So if you're looking, I will have to say I go to the Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Precious and Free International meeting, which is awesome. So would love to encourage you to come to that. And of course, there's in person too. So wherever you're at in Arizona, hope you're being able to find meetings that work for you. As it seems with steps 1, 2, and 3, that meetings have been crucial to my evolution so far.